PROMIS.
PROMIS.
PROMIS is the Prosecutor's Managerial Information System, which I don't think is in use anymore. But there's a book about this called The Octopus, which is published by Feral House, a great book publisher on the West Coast there. One of their early books. And it tells the story of a young freelance writer named Danny Casolaro who was murdered investigating this big scandalous story which he called The Octopus. And no one knows what The Octopus is, but it surrounded this software called PROMIS, the Prosecutor's Managerial Information System, which was created by a company called Inslaw. And they were selling it to the U.S. government. It was going to help catch organized crime and terrorism.
Right, in the 80s.
Very effective.
Right.
It is the friend wheel on Facebook.
Wow.
It's the same thing. Very rarely were you able to see a picture of it in action, but it's the same circular thing that's showing the networks in between people.
Yeah.
And it would track phone calls and any other type of data that you could feed into it, and it was very effective. This is way before the web, way before Windows.
Facebook will help it along nicely.
When Inslaw tried to sell it to the U.S. government, the Department of Justice had a copy for evaluation purposes. It somehow winds up at an Indian reservation where it's back-engineered, and the Department of Justice, the United States government, steals it, pirates it. Right?
Because the corrupt people, they'll get caught by it.
Yeah.
Because all these elitists, these globalists, the Bilderbergers,
yeah, they'll get caught with it.
They'll get caught.
Very easily. So they corrupt it, and they put a back door in it. And then they sell it to all the other governments around the Western governments around the world. And the only people who have access to the back door were the Americans and the Israelis. So all these other governments start using it, and now the corrupt elements can see inside of this software in every other country and track everybody.
Sure.
Meanwhile, Inslaw is trying to get its money because since they sold all these licenses illegally, there's like millions or billions of dollars involved.
Right.
I think the Department of Justice made over $1 billion in license fees. They sold it like openly, like a crooked thing.
They are criminals. And they are criminals. But I just want to keep that thought because I just wanted to, because actually Mark made a good point here, and I just wanted to make put it into the mix. Is that what they're doing now with this Swiss professor working with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Mind Machine Project, is exactly sort of like simulating what you're talking into this Facebook, because it says it right now that they have detects obsessiveness with individuals going back to the same topic over and over, measuring crescendos. It detects resentment in conversations through measurements in decibels and other voice biometrics.
Yeah, that's way beyond PROMIS. That's like going into mind reading.
Well, that's what they're doing now, and it says it right now that it's being used. Suppose that you know that there's a threat to the presidency when, say, in Texas. Oh God. Then through the information obtained by the National Security Agency, we have the tools to go through a huge quantity of data obtained from that area, and the computer system detects the resentment. So that's the whole thing. So they can actually, before a bomber, they're claiming, before a bomber does his bombing, a lone bomber, before he carries out his act, he can be a troubled veteran. Listen to this. This is the propaganda. A troubled veteran or a first responder ground down by tragedies and violence. 120 local first responders are learning how to use this thing, this advanced program that can accomplish these two seemingly different tasks.
And nowhere in this article does it raise any possible negative issues. This article is written from a very, like, oh, this is a great thing.
It's the New World Order point of view. It's the controlled totalitarian point of view. That's exactly what it is.
And what's really assisting that, though, is that there are no longer investigative reporters. People are basically
They're payroll puppets.
People are basically publishing what amount to press releases.
Notice this line.
Yeah. So a company or an organization says something, and the guy just sits there and writes it down or takes the text and publishes it.
They had this in airports like 2 years ago. They had these things that were going to see if you're nervous. Right? They were going to put them in the planes, like the little TV screen in the back of the next guy's seat, and you would watch a movie.
Right,
right. They were going to have a little camera that just watched you and watched
your face to
see if you were nervous.
Yeah.
And see if you were possibly some sort of
terrorist
or hijacker or something like that.
Well, then now, what about the collars now? Where they're like, so I call them collars, but they're wristbands. They want to put these wristbands on that have your ticket information, your baggage information, all the information that you'll need, so you don't need a ticket. You know your bags aren't going to get lost. And if you are a terrorist, they can zap you with a taser and dismobilize you.
Oh,
And they're thinking people are going to wrap these things on their hands so that you can be tasered or controlled. I mean, this is all about our rights. These are all examples of these insidious technologies. Right, they might as well just make it a handcuff, right.
They should put it around your neck, I think.
Yeah, just like in that Star Trek. Yeah. Well, that's the idea of the slavery. I mean, this is slavery.
They can measure your voice better. And
they measure your voice and see if you're nervous, yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. This is all...
My dad, when my dad gets on a plane, he's like the straightest guy in the world, but he's always like, you're just going through security checkpoint, he just starts sweating.
The fear is, that's the whole idea. It's you know, it's...
What's bothering you?
Look what happened.
Oh, and I'm always sweating when I'm in airports from just carrying a carry-on bag. So I always look. Plus, you know, the general, I have this sort of crazed look about me.
In line with that is the latest tyranny. They want to make a law that everybody has to pass a... Listen to this, listen to this. Everyone has to pass a psychological test. In other words, you got to go to a shrink to buy a gun. This is insane. So what they do is they figure out these ways to, like, give all of these potentials because of your reaction to this and to that. You fit this classification to deny us more and more. You know, that's what's going on here. It's a slow, steady dissolution. It just keeps going.
Maybe they'll have like these little oases in the New World Order where like certain privileged people can go and everything's allowed. So, oh, you want a cookie?
Yeah, exactly.
Have another cookie.
It's a good idea.
Would you like? Here, have some. You know, here, put our pleasure bracelets on. We'll give you an orb to stroke, and everything's. Are you anxious? It's okay. Here's a pill. Have another pill. It's just like, I guess that's what happened.
Sleeper.
Brave Sleeper, but also Brave New World was.
Brave New World.
If you were down with the program, you got your Soma, and everyone. You didn't have to go to Disney World. They gave you a whole bottle of Soma, and you were off for a couple of weeks, and you didn't have to go anywhere. Everyone had their place. They had their little caste system. Your alphas, betas, deltas, and gammas. And everyone just had to go do what they did. And then this barbarian comes in who doesn't get pigeonholed and screws up the whole order of things. Which is just like the movie Zardoz. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yes, yeah, sure. It's similar. It's like the funny thing about science fiction is that there's more fact than fiction, and it's just like undercurrents, like the Planet of the Apes. The same thing about racism and things of that nature. You know,
There was a poster recently about pre-crime. That comes from the
pre-crime from the film
Philip K. Dick short story that was made into a movie.
Minority Report.
Yes.
That's also Orwell.
Orwellian. The whole thing is like,
actually,
listen,
if you get into reading Philip K. Dick stories, they have a lot of, because he, you know, in his day, he was, you know, called very, you know, he was considered very paranoid, etc. And now when you look at his stories, a lot of them have come closer and closer and closer to truth. This is a little interesting. I'm looking at this one. On the civilian side, the program can be used by psychologists and other mental health providers who are working with war veterans and others to measure their progress in recovery. Well, that's, you know, I'm not sure I like that.
well, see, the whole thing, it goes back to, like, you know, like the CIA...
My recovery is a little personal. I'm not sure if I want information that the NSA has gathered.
Anyway, so getting back to PROMIS, this was going on for a while, and this reporter gets murdered. He dies in a bathtub, and I think he's tied up and his wrists are slit, and they called it a suicide. But
how nice.
Somehow he tied himself up
and slit his wrists.
Another similar thing happened to another writer.
Did you see
I think his name was a guy out of California who broke the whole CIA cocaine story in Los Angeles.
Oh.
Remember this guy?
Well, there's many of them. There's Los Angeles, there's
Arkansas.
Arkansas.
Shot twice in the head, and they called that a suicide.
Twice in the head.
Yeah.
The first time didn't do it.
Yeah, he shot himself twice in the head.
Flesh wound.
And it was ruled a suicide, but he had reported there were men like rappelling out of his window like a few days earlier, and he said it was the government. Also, William Cooper.
Yes,
he died with a SWAT team coming into his house. He was a speaker and a writer.
William Cooper there's somebody that I specifically remember. He is the one that he really knew all about the 9/11, that whole Mishmash.
So it turns out with PROMIS, the software engineer who did the back door came forward and told the story eventually. And he did so because Danny Casolaro got a hold of him. And his name was like Michael Ricaniusco or something. I believe he's now in federal prison in Massachusetts somewhere on some kind of amphetamine charge. But he said he was, you know, he was part of this whole thing, and he had a lot to say about September 11th, about certain explosives that were used in the building. They stopped using PROMIS on September 11th also because, as the story goes, when Bush was flying around on that plane, remember, and he wasn't really anywhere, he received a phone call. The plane, Air Force One received the phone call, and someone was like calling and said, "Bush, you're next." And it really freaked them out because the only way to track down Air Force One on a day like that was to have access to PROMIS. So somebody else had access to PROMIS, and they stopped using it altogether. But it's just an interesting story when you get down to all this business. And there's things going on. I like the alternative energy stuff. That there's all kinds of technology that it's been around since the '60s or even earlier that makes it, all these oil and wars and
not necessary.
Yeah, it's completely not necessary. Everyone could have all the
electricity. No, but they need it. The military-industrial complex. Like they have to. They have to get paid. Basically.
They don't, because they don't need to be fighting the wars.
Well, of course. I mean, we should. The whole. If you look at it,
that would be very disruptive.
I've pointed this out. Well, see, here's the lie. The big lie is this: that the UN and NATO and all of this, that it's like they do exactly the opposite that they say they're going to do. They speak peace, but they make war. They create conflicts. Soldiers are caught in false flag events all over the Middle East, put an attack in different areas, unstabilizing regions to continue their need for there being a war. It's just going on and on. Britain got caught doing it.
That goes back to Orwell too.
Yeah.
The Ministry of Peace.
Ministry of Peace, exactly.
And they're doing the opposite of what they say.
It is exactly the opposite of what it is. Doublespeak.
UFOs appear to be some sort of advanced military technology.
Yeah, that's all it is.
And it seems that the UFO abduction, that whole thing, which stopped in the 90s, it was in the 80s and the 90s.
Interesting.
Suddenly there's really not a lot of UFO abductions anymore. They kind of gave up on it. But that was a cover for mind control experiments.